This is Chapter 15, Presentation Aids. And a presentation aid is also called a sensory aid. And these are resources beyond the speech itself that a speaker uses to enhance the message conveyed to an audience. And the type of presentation aids most often used are pictures, diagrams, charts, graphs, maps. We also have audible aids. And so these would be things like musical excerpts, audio speech excerpts, and sound effects. Speaker can also use fragrance samples or food samples as an olfactory or gustatory aid, which is kind of interesting. And presentation aids can be three-dimensional objects, animals, people. They can unfold over a period of time, like a how-to demonstration, any sort of thing like that. Some general guidelines for using presentational aids. It must be a direct, uncluttered example of a specific element of that speech. It shouldn't be a messy thing. It shouldn't be a long to-do. It should just be a pretty clear-cut thing. Presentation aids must be used at the time when you're presenting those specific ideas related to the aid. So you don't want to talk about everything and then at the end say, okay, here's what I talked about 10 minutes ago. I'm going to show you how it works. You should show it at the time you're talking about it. Presentation aids must also be easy to use, and they must be easy for listeners to see and understand. So a couple functions of presentation aids. We use them for a variety of reasons. First is to improve audience understanding. So communication is a really complex process that can lead to misunderstandings, and that's because perception and interpretation are highly complex individual processes. And so 2 ways to reduce misunderstandings. 1, through clarifying to make it clear so the audience understands your meaning in the way you intend, and through emphasizing, which is impressing the importance or to repeat the verbal message in visual form. And so this visual helps be clear and it helps to emphasize, which helps reduce misunderstandings. Next, the next function is aiding retention and recall. A 1996 article by the U.S. Department of Labor summarized research on how people learn and remember, and they found that 83% of human learning occurs visually. The remaining 17% come through other senses like hearing, smell, taste, touch. Another set of research findings show that audiences retain 10% of what they hear, 35% from a visual presentation, and they retain 65% from visual and an oral presentation. So if we want people to retain the most that they can, which is 65%, you need it to be oral and visual. And that's why teachers usually combine the two, so they can reach the majority of their listeners. The third function is to add variety and interest. Now, speech can be made even more interesting by the use of well-chosen presentation aids. And people can only take listening to a talking head like me for so long, so you need additional presentation aids. And also, the last one is to enhance the speaker's credibility. Your presentation aids need to be clean, clear, uncluttered, organized, and large enough for the audience to see and interpret correctly. Misspellings, poor design, those can negatively affect your credibility. And a high-quality presentation will contribute to your professional image as well. So, and also make sure that you're giving credit to the source of any presentation aid you take from a different source. So if you use a picture from a website, you need to have the little source citation on that slide. Or if you're showing like a YouTube clip, you want to give credit to the YouTube clip, maybe to the user, the username, whatever that little username is, you can give credit to that. Now, some general principles for using presentation aids. Only use as many presentation aids as necessary for your message. And the technological sophistication of your presentation aid should not overshadow your speech. I saw an awesome presentation on just texting in the classroom, and the person using it had things flying in. He was working from his phone, which had the Apple TV hooked up to the projector, and it was just so cool. And I don't know what he talked about because his technology was overshadowing his actual content. So you want to be aware of that. You also want to keep your presentation aids within the limits of the working technology available to you. Sometimes you might be giving a speech where there is very slow internet, and so you might not want to be streaming videos as part of your presentation. You also want your presentation aid, or you also want to be prepared for your technology to backfire. And so you need backup plans. You need to have practice with them enough so you're used to anything it can throw at you. You want to deliver clear information and not distract from the message. You also want to avoid overly elaborate presentation aids, again, because they can distract. When you display a visual aid, you want to explain why you're showing it or what it shows, what it's pointing out. You don't want to also use every single presentation tool available to you. That can get too much, and that can also, again, be distracting. And your presentation aids should be designed to look like a coherent set, so they all blend together. We have various types of presentation aids. First is the chart, and this is a graphical representation of data, often numerical, or a sketch that represents an ordered process. And we have statistical charts, sequence of steps charts, decision trees, lots of good stuff. Second type of presentation aid is a graph. And this is a pictorial representation of the relationships of quantitative data using dots, lines, bars, pie slices, whatever Microsoft Word allows you to use. A line graph shows trends over time. A bar graph shows differences between quantities, and a pie graph shows differences between quantities as well. A representation is the next type of presentation aid. Representations are a group of aids designed to represent real processes or objects. So diagrams or drawings or sketches that outline and explain the parts of an object or process. Maps might include population map, weather, ocean current, political maps. Then we have photographs and drawings, which are just the best way to show an unfamiliar but important detail. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Then we also have video or audio recordings, which allow audience members to hear or see something they wouldn't hear or see just by listening to the speaker. Another type of presentation aid is an object or model. Objects are anything you can hold up and talk about during your speech. There was a good example of an informative speech on protein powder or protein drinks that one of our TAs did for us. That would be an object that he could hold up and say, this is what I'm talking about. A model is a recreation of physical objects that you won't have readily available. So if you're talking about a huge house or a huge park, maybe you just bring a little model of it in so you can show us how everything's being built. The next thing we have are people and animals. With animals, when giving a speech on a topic related to animals, it's often tempting to bring in that animal, but I would tell you not to for this class because you can't have animals in the classrooms. We have a couple of risks as well. Animal behavior is unpredictable. Some audience members might respond negatively. They might be allergic or they might be really afraid of that animal. And again, some locations might have regulations about bringing animals onto the premises. Now, a speaker as a presentation aid, speakers can use their own bodies, maybe demonstrating a process. I'm thinking like karate, if you're showing how you do things and you know how, you would be a good self-presentation aid. And then you can also use other people as a presentation aid. You want to arrange ahead of time for people to be effective aids. You don't want to just assume that an audience member will volunteer on the spot. You might want to set that up in advance. You have to make certain that the person is dressed appropriately for whatever you're doing. So if you're going to have them help you do some sort of workout, you want to make sure they're in workout clothes, not just a dress or something that's difficult to work out in. And you just want to use your best judgment about the behavior and make sure that your human presentation aid knows what you're doing and knows why you're doing it. Now, we also need to talk about ethically using mediated aids. And the venue of your speech suggests if you can use like an electronic aid like PowerPoint, or if you can use clip art or anything like that that's electronically presented. Presentation aids should never look hastily made. They shouldn't look dirty, bad, or disorganized. They don't need to look fancy by any means, but they do need to look professional. And so if you're making a model, you want it to look nice. You don't want it to look like something you just threw together and just so you could have something, right? You want it to look nice. We have various types of mediated presentation aids. First is computer-based media. And this is, using PowerPoint or other similar software to create and display presentation aids. Presentation software is defined as software packages that enable a speaker to visually show material through the use of a computer and a projector. And speakers should use the technology to support the speech, not get carried away with all the cool stuff that software can do. And I know, like, when people just started to learn PowerPoint, they love each letter flying in and going, or like swirling in and then landing. Don't get carried away with that. Some universal principles of good design. These are good to follow no matter what software you're using. Unity is one, so use a single font for the text on your visuals. You want to have an emphasis or focal point, and the focus should be on the slide's content, not on the slide's animation or transitions. Third, scale and proportion. It's essential to make sure the information is large enough for the audience to see. So you guys scale it up. Balance is the next thing, and this is the amount of content on slides. This should be relatively balanced. Just like in your outline, we want the main points to be kind of balanced. You want the amount of content on each slide to be relatively balanced. And then the fifth principle is rhythm. You don't want to display a bunch of different slides in the first minute of a 5-minute presentation and then display only one slide per minute for the rest. This kind of goes with the balance, but it's on a larger scale, so it's rhythm. You don't want to front load it or back load it. You just want it to be nice and rhythmic. With audio-visual media, these are useful for illustrating musical themes or video that clarifies, explains, amplifies, emphasizes, or illustrates a key concept. When using either audio and visual aids, don't rely just on the aid to do the presentation for you. You want to identify a specific section of that video. Instead of showing a 10-minute long video, you want to show the little snippet that's really relevant to your speech. You want to cue it up. So get the DVD in, get the VHS in, get YouTube opened up. If it's YouTube, you want to get that first ad out of the way, drag it over, cue it up, push pause, get it ready to go. Make sure the volume's ready. So when you get to that part of the speech, you just hit play, it plays, you hit stop, and then you keep going with your speech. You don't want to have to interrupt your speech, pause, fiddle with it. You want it to be ready to go. You want to tell your audience where the footage comes from and why you're showing it. You can say, so in this clip, you'll be able to see an example of whatever. Then with some low-tech media, why would we use low-tech media? Well, maybe computer technology is not available. Maybe it's counterproductive to use a PowerPoint. I don't know. Low-tech media are very predictable, and they're inexpensive to produce. Some problems with low-tech media, though, they can be prone to physical damage, smudges, dents, scratches, rips, and it can be harder to make them look consistent and professional. So some types of low-tech media, chalk or dry erase boards, those are always good. They're great when you want to generate information using your audience. You can say, oh, who can give me an example of this? Oh, yes, I'll write that on the board. So then you're creating it with them. But it's not a prepared presentation aid. You don't make it ahead of time. You make it during. When you're using a chalk or dry erase board, you want to write large enough and print legibly and print in short phrases. A flip chart is another type. These can be prepared in advance or they can be unprepared and you use them like you would a dry erase board. Each page should be neatly titled if you're doing this in advance. You want to give the pages as consistent a look as possible. And you want to use your flip chart so you flip the pages only in one direction, not back and forth. Either go forward or you flip from this direction. And you want to make sure you have an easel or somewhere to put your flip chart. Another type of low-tech media is the foam board. It's just a thin sheet of styrofoam with heavy paper bonded to both surfaces. It's lightweight, inexpensive, stands on its own, doesn't curl up, but this is one that's prone to dents. So, you know. We also have poster board. And this is cheaper than foam board and consists of a thin piece of cardstock, but it is flimsier, it's more vulnerable to damage, and it doesn't really stand on its own very well. And then the last one is handouts. These are appropriate for delivering information that an audience can take with them. Now, with handouts, you want to do this at the end of your speech, because as soon as you start handing things out, they're going to be reading and fiddling and all, here you go, pass it. It's distracting to everyone, including you. So be very careful with those. Other tips with using handouts, make sure to bring enough copies of the handout for each audience member to get one. Determine when to give your audience the handout, and I recommend at the end. If you need your listeners to follow along in the handout, then you want to hand it out at the very beginning of your speech before you even get started. You just say, oh, I have some handouts. Does everybody have one? Okay, and then you start with your presentation from there. The handout's a takeaway. You can even leave it on a table near the door so then people can grab it on their way out. Now, for the purposes of this class, that's probably not the best option for you, but it is an option when you're giving presentations later in life. Like I said, it's almost never appropriate to distribute handouts during your speech because it's really disruptive. And handouts should only include necessary information to support your points, and it should be really clearly organized. Other tips for preparing presentation aids: it should be easily seen or heard by your audience. It must be accessible for everybody in your audience. It must be large enough to read, loud enough to hear, clean lines, whatever it is you're using, those are some guidelines to follow. And you want to limit the amount of text on your presentation aid. With handling, there should be an ease of handling. You should be able to carry your presentation aids into the room by yourself. You should be skilled in using the equipment you're presenting on because you need to be independent. You don't know if you're going to have a helper all the time. The next thing, it should be aesthetically pleasing, which means it looks good. It should look nice. And then with text aids, you should use text only when you must. Only when you have to. If you can use a picture, you should use a picture instead. The type must be big, bold, simple. When you display the text, you want to either read it out loud or acknowledge it before you go on, right? And you should never just read what's on your text slides and consider it good enough. That's not a speech. That's not speaking from carefully prepared notes. That's reading a PowerPoint to your audience, and that's not going to do well for you in this class or in life. People don't like that. And then some tips for graphic aids. You want to make sure the graphic is visible for all audience members. They need to be appropriate for your speech. They need to be large enough so everyone can see. And you want to cite where you got that image from. And that shows integrity and credibility. Now, in terms of rules for computer presentations, first you want to watch your font. Just because you can read it on the screen doesn't mean your audience can read it in their seats. You want to make sure each slide is legible from the back of the room. In most circumstances, basically a 32-point font or bigger is what you want to aim for, 32-point font or bigger. Don't write everything out. You don't want to put too much information on a slide. You want to make sure that your slide has the appropriate information to support the point you're making, but you don't want like full sentence paragraphs on the slide unless you need to display a very important direct quotation. The next rule, don't bow down to the software. It's an aid, so it should aid your speech, not hinder it. Like I said, don't stand and read your PowerPoint slides. It kills your eye contact. It's bad delivery, not good. But you also don't want to hide behind your computer monitor to see what's being projected. You should have practiced with your PowerPoint. You can make notes on your speaking notes that say, oh, next slide here, click now. You want to look back and make sure it's presented. But you don't want to just sit there and read it and then look up. Bad. Slide color is really important. You don't want to go overboard or use unappealing combinations of colors. And I'll show you a couple of examples here of bad things to do and why, because it's just so hard to see. Okay. So we have here, I don't know if you can see this, we'll just do it like this. We have the light background, which is fine, with the dark text. That's fairly easy to see. Dark background with light type. We want to have a uniform background color. This is a medium colored background. It's okay. It's going to get harder to see, especially if there's windows in the classroom or one of those emergency lights. It kind of blends these together. This is shifting from light to dark. Not good, because as you can see over here. Blues, unless it's a navy blue, blues are just, they hurt your eyes. I don't know. So you want to be careful with slide color. The next thing is slide movement. Even though you have some cool slide movement, bells and whistles, that sort of thing, you want to kind of avoid that. And I don't know if you can see this. We'll give it a try. See, that's pretty annoying. That's pretty annoying because it's going to be consistently going while your text is coming in and people are going to be staring at that clock and it just kind of stays in the same place. This is a good example of a nice text slide. It's balanced. There's a little bit too much text on this one. It's about South Dakota, which is where I'm from, so I'm a little partial to it. But I just want to say Mount Rushmore, Corn Palace, Wall Drug, and then cut off all that extra information. This is what a serif font looks like, and this is what a sans serif font looks like. It's easier to read sans serif fonts on large presentations like this. Also with pictures, you want to have, you don't want to make them too big where they get pixely. So here's the original, here it's too big. Again, this is the original, this is resized badly. What you want to do is border and shadow it so it looks nice. This one, you don't need a border because it's a circle. It kind of has its own border. So those are just some examples of following tips and why we have these tips. Last couple of things, you want to practice with visual aids. It's vital to practice using the technology. And if you don't know how to use it, your audience will notice and your credibility will be harmed. And finally, always have a backup plan, always. And one of the most important parts of being a professional is just keeping your speech moving in spite of any unexpected problems. And you need to decide in advance what you're going to do if things break down or disappear or the wrong version of your PowerPoint is up there and you don't realize it till you're in the middle of your speech. You have to just be able to keep going, keep presenting, and just be professional about it. So that those are some of the basics about presentation aids. And if you're really interested in these, we cover them even more in depth in ACS 200, which is advanced presentation skills.